The most interesting thing about the 3.4 livestream wasn't the Edgerunner collaboration, and it wasn't Lucilla's story either. It was what both of them reveal about Wuthering Waves itself. Looking at everything shown during the livestream, one thing became very clear. This is a much more confident game than it was a year ago. Whether it's the Edgerunner collab or Lucilla's segue story, the 3.4 livestream did nothing but build anticipation for what's coming next in Wuthering Waves. So there's a lot to talk about here, the banners, the rewards, the collaboration itself, but we're a story channel, so that's what we're going to focus on. Beneath all the announcements, version 3.4 is actually setting up two very different, yet equally interesting narratives. On one side, we have the continuation of the main story through Lucilla, a story that doesn't just revolve around her character, but also the future of Rebel College itself, now that the very reason for its existence is gone. On the other, we have one of the most ambitious collaborations Wuthering Waves has attempted so far, bringing the world of cyberpunk Edgerunners into the game and opening the doors to a completely different kind of story. Both of them raise some very interesting questions. But before we talk about Lucilla and where the main story might be heading next, we have to start with the thing everyone has been waiting for, the Edgerunner collab. For most people, the biggest appeal of a collaboration is always going to be the characters. That's completely understandable. For me though, the thing that interests me the most is the story itself. And usually, I don't expect much from collaboration stories. Most of them exist primarily as fan service. They bring popular characters into another world for a few weeks, create a fun event around them, and then everything goes back to normal as if nothing ever happened. That's why Wuthering Waves managed to surprise me here, through all the promotional material they've been releasing over the past few months, and especially through everything shown during the livestream. They have done an amazing job of raising my expectations for this collaboration. Lucy and Rebecca are the biggest reasons why. Even from the small amount we've seen so far, it's obvious that a lot of effort went into preserving what made these characters memorable in the first place. They don't feel like characters that were toned down to fit into another game, they feel like Lucy and Rebecca. That's the biggest compliment I can give this collaboration. You can hear it in their dialogue, their interactions, even the voice acting itself. I personally play with Japanese voice acting, but even listening to the English version during the livestream, it was immediately obvious how much personality these characters still carry. Rebecca especially stands out for me. The moment she starts talking, you immediately know who she is. Everything about her feels authentic to the character people fell in love with in Edgerunners. And what I appreciate the most is that Kuro clearly wasn't afraid to let these characters remain themselves. Even small details help sell that. For example, Rebecca actually swears. Now, that might sound like a tiny thing, but it matters. Since there really isn't a character like Rebecca anywhere in Wuthering Waves right now, she brings a completely different energy to the cast. Instead of smoothing those rough edges away to make her fit the setting better, the developer seems to have embraced them. That makes the collaboration feel far more genuine. The same thing applies to the Night City itself. The new area looks fantastic, and while both the Night City and the Edgerunner cast feel very different from the usual atmosphere of Wuthering Waves, they never feel alien to it. Different, yes. Out of place? Not really. Instead, they feel like they're bringing a completely new flavor into the world without breaking it. I think that balance is much harder to achieve than people realize. These collaborations often struggle with feeling disconnected from the world they're inserted into. This one doesn't seem to have that problem. If anything, everything we've seen so far suggests that Kuro wants this collaboration to feel like a genuine story rather than a temporary event. And speaking of temporary events, there is another detail that immediately caught my attention. The story itself is permanent. Even if someone misses the event period, they'll still be able to experience the narrative later. Suffice to say, I love that decision. It tells me that the developers view this as an actual addition to the game rather than something disposable. Still, with all the excitement surrounding the Edgerunner collaboration, it would be very easy to overlook the other side of version 3.4. While Night City might be getting most of the attention right now, Lucilla's story and the continuation of the main narrative might end up being just as interesting. I have to admit, the livestream showed a lot more than I expected from what is technically being presented as a segue quest. The biggest thing I took away from it wasn't Lucilla herself, it was how much Wuthering Waves has evolved as a story. While this may be Lucilla's story on paper, that's clearly not all it is. This is the continuation of Lahai Roy's story. Honestly, I love that. One of the easiest things the writers could have done after the conclusion of version 3.3 was simply move on to the next major arc. Lahai Roi received this big climax, the conflict was resolved, the heroes won, the credits could have rolled, and the story could have shifted its attention somewhere else entirely. Instead, Wuthering Waves chose to ask a much more interesting question: what happens after the victory? Now that the Exos Rider has descended into the deep to keep Aleph 1 in check, the very thing that justified the existence of the Rebel College is gone. The institution that helped define Lahai Roi as a region no longer has a purpose. Suddenly, a completely different conflict emerges, a conflict about identity. If the Rebel College disappears, then an entire way of life disappears with it. The students lose something, the teachers lose something, the region itself loses something. That's a much stronger conflict than I expected from a segue quest, because it directly builds upon the consequences of everything that happened in the main story. Nothing is happening in isolation, nothing feels disconnected. The ending of one story naturally creates the beginning of another. That's exactly what good serialized storytelling should do. Looking back at the beginning of Wuthering Waves, character stories were mostly self-contained experiences. They existed primarily to develop the featured character. There is nothing inherently wrong with that, but they rarely felt essential to the larger world. Now, that approach feels completely different. The character is no longer the only focus, the world matters too. Events of the main story affect the character affects the world, and both continue moving forward together. It's a massive improvement because it makes the setting feel alive. Instead of feeling like a series of disconnected episodes, the story now feels like a continuous narrative where every major event leaves consequences behind. I think we first started seeing that shift with Sigrika's story. Now Lucilla seems ready to push that idea even further, which is why, despite all the excitement surrounding the Edgerunner collaboration, this might actually be the part of version 3.4 that interests me the most, simply because Wuthering Waves is showing us what kind of story it wants to become moving forward. The interesting thing about confidence in storytelling is that it changes the kind of stories a game is willing to tell. Once a story becomes confident in its world, its characters and its audience, it stops relying on constant introductions and starts building upon what already exists. That's exactly what stood out to me throughout this livestream. Whether it's the Edgerunner collaboration or Lucilla's story, both of them are built on the same idea: expansion through continuity rather than replacement. It shows up in the way they're handling Lucilla's story. Instead of treating it as a standalone character episode, they chose to continue the consequences of the Lahai Roi arc and build an entirely new conflict from them. That's not the approach of a story constantly chasing the next big thing. It's the approach of a story willing to slow down, explore its own world, and build upon the foundations it already created. But we can see the exact same thing in the Edgerunner collaboration as well. What impressed me the most wasn't simply the fact that Lucy and Rebecca are coming to the game, it was how much effort went into making sure they still felt like Lucy and Rebecca. Whether it's the Night City itself, making the story permanent, and the overall presentation of the collaboration, nothing about it feels disposable. I think that says a lot about how the developers view the game itself. It would have been very easy to treat this as a one-time event, bring in some popular characters, create a temporary story, and move on. Instead, everything we've seen so far suggests they want this collaboration to become an actual part of Wuthering Waves, rather than something that simply passes through it. And that matters, not only because of this collaboration specifically, but because it establishes expectations moving forward. The amount of care being put into this event creates confidence that future collaborations will be treated with the same level of attention and respect. That's one of the biggest reasons why this livestream left such a strong impression on me. It showed a team that seems increasingly confident in the kind of story they want to tell and the kind of game they want Wuthering Waves to become. And looking at everything we have coming in version 3.4, whether it's the continuation of Lahai Roi's story or the arrival of Night City, I honestly think that confidence is the most exciting thing revealed during the entire livestream. That's why version 3.4 left such a strong impression on me even before it's released. The Edgerunner collaboration shows a team willing to go all in on a crossover instead of treating it like disposable content. Lucilla's story shows a team willing to build upon the consequences of its own narrative instead of constantly chasing the next big event. They are two completely different stories, yet both of them reflect the same commitment to the game. If Wuthering Waves continues moving in that direction, that's the most exciting thing about its future. But what do you think about the livestream? What do you think about the Edgerunner collaboration? And are you excited for version 3.4? I know I am. That's enough for me for this one. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.